So if you guys are anything like me, growing up, I used to be super insecure about how thin my wrists were. In fact, it got so bad to the point that there was a period of time in my life where I only wore long sleeves just to hide my skinny wrists. So I wanted to make this video for those that feel the same way. Here's how to grow your forearms with only dumbbells. Let's get to it. So before we even get into exercises, it's important to cover how nutrition would actually impact your forearm growth. Like any muscle, if you want to maximize growth, you need to be in a calorie surplus. However, it's not as simple as the bigger the surplus, the more forearm growth you're gonna have, because there is a balance that you're gonna need to strike. I personally recommend just 5% above your maintenance calories, which is what many would consider a lean bulk. But if you're trying to minimize fat gain, maybe you're at a higher body fat percentage currently, then maybe it makes sense for you to be eating at maintenance as opposed to a calorie surplus. On the flip side, if you're dieting or eating at a caloric deficit, then you're not gonna be able to build the forearms as efficiently as possible. However, there might be a big reason for you to be eating in a caloric deficit for the overall aesthetics of your forearms. You see, a big part of having nice looking forearms isn't just pure size, but seeing the separation in each individual muscle that contributes to the forearm. Whether it be seeing the separation of the brachioradialis up here, or as simple as doing this and being able to see stuff move here. And the way to see that separation is by being at a lower body fat percentage. Meaning if you're currently at a higher body fat percentage, there just might not be as much definition to your forearms despite it growing overall in size. And last point I want to talk about where it might make sense to be in a calorie deficit is vascularity. Similar to seeing separation, having vascularity in your forearms enhances the overall aesthetic of your forearms, meaning your forearms will look more impressive despite being overall smaller in size. Me personally, I don't have huge forearms. They've considerably grown since I started, but they're not absolutely massive like I'm a world champion arm wrestler or anything like that. And again, the single best thing you can do to enhance visible vascularity is by being at a lower body fat percent. So just wanted to point that out. The last thing I want to cover before we get into exercises is skinny wrists. Now, unfortunately, unless you're a teenager, you're not going to be able to significantly grow the thickness of your wrist because most of this is bone. However, again, from an aesthetics point of view, having skinny wrists actually enhances your forearm because your forearms look bigger in relation to your wrists. Ultimately, aesthetics has a lot to do with proportions, so think of your skinny wrists as kind of a blessing in disguise that you're not gonna need necessarily huge forearms in order for them to look impressive. So let's get into the exercise. Now, a common question that a lot of people tend to ask is, should I directly or indirectly train my forearms? Now, personally, I opted to indirectly train them for a majority of my fitness journey. However, I did experiment with training forearms directly, and like any muscle, this is super logical, but like any muscle, my forearms respond better when you directly train them. With that in mind, if you're strapped for time and you just don't want to train your forearms for whatever reason, then at least focus on progressing with your pulling exercises or certain leg exercises that involve your grip strength, such as a walking lunge or a deadlift. And by pulling exercises, I mean essentially training your biceps as well as your back. So rows, back pull down, bicep curls, these are all exercises that challenge your grip and generally involve your forearms to some degree. However, this video is about maximizing growth, and if you want to maximize growth, you need to directly train them. So let's get to the first exercise. Now this first exercise is going to be biasing the brachioradialis, which is this big meaty portion of the upper forearm. And a reverse curl sounds exactly like what it is. Instead of curling with a supinated wrist, you simply turn your wrist around and pronate and do the curl from this position. Now naturally, you're not gonna be exactly pronated when you're doing the curl. So as long as your starting position is with the back of your palms facing away and you're not using too much momentum, consider yourself doing the exercise correctly. Now there's kind of an ongoing debate on whether a hammer curl or a reverse curl is gonna be better for the brachioradialis. In my opinion, why not just program both? You see, the reverse curl is gonna involve the extensors as well as the brachioradialis, as well as have that added factor of grip strength come into play, which can be seen as both a positive thing in that you're training your grip strength, but also a negative thing where it's a limiting factor for the overall movement because your grip is probably gonna give out before your actual brachioradialis. On the other hand, a hammer curl is gonna be much easier for you to maintain your grip, with the caveat being that you're gonna involve more of the brachialis on top of the brachioradialis. So in my mind, when it comes to this, either do both or opt for the one that you personally enjoy the most. So the second exercise I want to show you guys is a unilateral dumbbell wrist curl. this is gonna be training the forearm flexors, which is the muscles on the inside of your forearm. Now there's many ways to do this. You can do like a behind the back version too, but I find that with the behind the back, it's essentially a shortened partial, because with the behind the back version, you're bringing your forearm from neutral to flexed. However, when we prop our arm on a bench, we're able to start from extension, meaning we're able to get a better stretch on the forearm muscle and take it through a fuller active range of motion. It's like the difference between doing this and this. So with that, we're trying to get a good stretch on the forearm, meaning let your wrist come all the way back here, as long as it feels comfortable, without dangling the dumbbells on your fingers too much, because that can cause some pain. So maintain a firm grip when you bring your wrist back, and then flex your wrist forward. That's pretty much how the wrist curl goes. Now because we're doing this unilaterally, the idea is that we're more stable elsewhere, and we can push closer to failure. But because when we're training forearms, we're dealing with smaller exercises, allow yourself a shorter rest time if this becomes too tedious to do. Because let's be honest, like no one really wants to be doing this forever. Which is why I think this is a great exercise to be paired with the third exercise. But before I get into that, if you're having trouble following along and you're like, okay, honestly, I just want to take the guesswork out of building a great physique, then I highly recommend you apply to my exclusive one-on-one fitness coaching program, where I pretty much create a custom workout program for you, as well as a customizable meal plan that can help you find recipes that actually fit your macros. So if that sounds interesting to you, apply in the link in the description, and I look forward to working with you. Let's get back to the video. The last exercise I want to show you guys is a unilateral dumbbell wrist extensor. So it's similar to the wrist curl, but instead of going from wrist extension to wrist flexion, we're going from wrist flexion to wrist extension. So you're likely going to want to use a lighter dumbbell for this, but with the wrist extensor, we're essentially going to set up the same way we did with a forearm flexor. You want your entire lower arm to be supported and have this bent arm position. I like using a bench, but honestly, the end of a table may work if it's like sturdy enough. And what you're trying to do is go from, again, wrist flexion here to wrist extension up here. And that looks like this. Try to slow the eccentric on the way back down. And like I mentioned earlier, this can be paired with the wrist flexor from earlier. So you can start with wrist flexors, and once you're done there, you can flip over and do some wrist extensors. And you can pretty much consider this an antagonistic superset. You're not going to be directly fatiguing your wrist extensors from that first exercise. That is how you grow bigger forearms. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Hope it was super helpful. Now, in terms of sets and reps, I think forearms are one of the only muscles where I think higher volume would probably work. So working at a higher rep range, let's say around 10 to 15, doing at least 2 or 3 sets. I don't feel like you need to do every single exercise all in one day. I think logically splitting it across the week might be more feasible depending on how many days to go. But with that in mind, leave a like to support my page and hit subscribe if you want to see more videos to level up your physique. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.